The desert wind carried the scent of sage and dust through the windows of Judge Whitmore's mansion. But Clara couldn't smell anything beyond the suffocating perfume of the imported roses that filled every corner of the drawing room. She sat rigid in her mother's old armchair, hands folded in her lap, watching her father pace before the fireplace like a caged wolf. "The wedding will proceed as planned," Judge Whitmore declared, his voice carrying the same finality he used when sentencing men to hang. "Horace Tilton is offering more than marriage, Clara. He's offering us power that extends beyond this dusty territory." Clara's fingers tightened around the lace handkerchief in her lap. At 22, she'd watched her father transform from a man of justice into something else entirely, something that valued influence over integrity. The change had come slowly after her mother's death from fever 3 summers past, but now it consumed him like wildfire. "I don't love him, Father." The words came out steady, though her heart hammered against her corset stays. The judge stopped pacing and fixed her with those cold gray eyes that had made grown men tremble in his courtroom. "Love? This isn't one of those penny novels you hide beneath your bed. Child, this is survival. This is legacy." Through the window, Clara could see the town of Las Cruces spreading out below their hill like a collection of wooden toys. Somewhere down there, Horace Tilton was probably counting his acres and planning how many more he could acquire once he had a judge's daughter as his bride. The thought made her stomach turn. Mother would never have— The crack of her father's palm against the mantelpiece silenced her. "Your mother is dead, and her romantic notions died with her. You'll marry Tilton tomorrow at sunset, and that's the end of it." Clara rose from the chair, her dark skirts rustling like rattlesnake warnings. "Yes, Father." She dipped into a perfect curtsy, the one her governess had drilled into her since childhood. "May I retire to prepare?" He waved her away, already turning back to the papers on his desk. Land deeds, no doubt, or lists of men whose fates he would decide come Monday's court session. In her room, Clara pressed her ear against the door, listening to the household settle into its evening routines. Maria, their Mexican housekeeper, hummed while preparing tomorrow's feast. The stable boys laughed over some joke in the yard. Everything moved forward as if her world wasn't ending with tomorrow's sunset. She changed into her plainest dress, a brown wool more suited to a farmhand's wife than a judge's daughter, and pulled her mother's old travel cloak from the back of her wardrobe. Hidden beneath loose floorboards were her secrets: $30 silver saved from years of birthday gifts, her mother's Derringer pistol no bigger than her palm, and a compass that had belonged to her grandfather when he'd first come west. The moon hadn't risen yet when she heard them in her father's study below. Horace Tilton's voice drifted up through the floor, oily and confident. "Once she's mine, Judge, you won't have to worry about her wild notions anymore. I know how to handle spirited fillies." Her father's responding laughter made her blood run cold. "Just ensure she produces an heir quickly. After that, her opinions won't matter much. Oh, she'll be too busy with babies to cause trouble. And if she does—" Horace trailed off, but Clara heard the implicit threat. "Well, accidents happen on ranches. Horses throw riders. Women take ill. Just remember our agreement." Her father said, "Your money and land influence help me secure the governor's backing for the Territorial Supreme Court. In return, any disputes over your acquisitions will find favorable judgment in my courtroom." Clara stuffed her few possessions into a canvas bag, her hands shaking with rage and fear. She'd suspected her father's corruption, but hearing it spoken so plainly turned her stomach. And to know she was just currency in their dark exchange, it was more than she could bear. She waited until the house grew quiet, until even Maria's footsteps faded from the kitchen. Then she slipped out her window, using the trellis her mother had once planted with morning glories. The wood creaked under her weight, but held. The stable boys had already bedded down for the night. Clara saddled her mare, Sombra, with practiced quiet. The black horse nickered softly, and Clara pressed a hand to her velvet nose. Shh, girl, we're leaving, for good this time. She led Sombra out the back gate, walking until they were far enough from the house to mount without being heard. Then she swung into the saddle and turned the mare's head toward the mountains that loomed black against the stars. The Santa Fe Trail would be watched. The main roads, too, but she'd heard whispers of the wild places, canyons and mesas, where even the Apache thought twice about venturing. Places like Devil's Throat, that maze of stone and shadow where men disappeared and were never found. As she rode, the desert transformed around her. The familiar became foreign. Coyotes called from the darkness, and once she heard the scream of a mountain cat. Sombra's ears flicked nervously, but the mare kept moving, trusting her rider even as they left all known paths behind. By dawn, Las Cruces had vanished behind the rising swells of rock and sand. Clara's throat burned with thirst, and her body ached from hours in the saddle. But she pressed on, following game trails and dry washes, always climbing higher into the labyrinth of stone. The sun reached its zenith when Sombra began to stumble. The mare's coat was slick with sweat, her breathing labored. Clara dismounted and led her into the shade of an overhang, using precious water from her canteen to wet the horse's mouth. "Just a little farther," she whispered, though she had no idea where a farther might lead. That's when she saw it, a narrow crack in the canyon wall, barely wide enough for a horse to pass through. Beyond it, the passage opened into a hidden valley scattered with juniper and pinyon pine. A thin stream of water trickled from the rocks, forming a small pool before disappearing into the sand. Clara led Sombra to the water, then collapsed beside her, cupping the cool liquid in her palms and drinking deeply. They'd found sanctuary, at least for now. But as the sun began its descent, painting the canyon walls the color of dried blood, Clara realized the full weight of what she'd done. She was alone in the wilderness with limited supplies, no shelter and no plan beyond escape. And somewhere behind her, her father and Horace would already be organizing search parties. She found a shallow cave in the canyon wall, little more than a depression in the stone, but it would keep the wind off. Using dried grass and branches, she made a bed for herself and settled in to wait out the night. Sombra grazed on the sparse grass nearby, the mare's presence a small comfort in the vast loneliness. Fever came with the darkness, whether from exhaustion, the drastic change in temperature, or something she'd drunk. Clara couldn't tell. She huddled in her mother's cloak, shivering and burning by turns. In her delirium, she called out for her mother, begging her to make the pain stop, to take her away from all of this. "Mama, please, I can't. It's too hard." The canyon walls threw her voice back at her, mocking echoes that sounded like ghost whispers. Shadows danced at the edge of her vision, perhaps real, perhaps fever dreams. She fumbled for the derringer, but her fingers were too weak to hold it steady. That's when she saw him. A figure stood at the cave's entrance, backlit by stars, tall, broad-shouldered, still as the stone itself. Clara tried to speak, to threaten or plead, but only a whimper escaped her cracked lips. The man stepped forward, and moonlight revealed his face, or what was left of it. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, pulling his mouth into a permanent half-grimace. His eyes were dark as the space between stars, and they studied her with the detached interest of a wolf studying wounded prey. He wore leather and dust, with a gun belt slung low on his hips and a rifle across his back. Everything about him spoke of violence, of a life lived outside civilization's boundaries. Clara's hand found the derringer at last, raising it with trembling fingers. The scarred man didn't flinch. Instead, his ruined mouth curved into something that might have been amusement. "You planning to shoot me with that toy, princess?" His voice was rough as sandstone, worn down by wind and years. "Go ahead, but you might want to save your bullet. There's worse than me in these canyons." The derringer slipped from Clara's fingers as consciousness fled. The last thing she saw was the stranger moving closer, his shadow falling over her like a shroud. In her dreams, she was back in her father's house, dressed in white lace and chains, walking down an aisle toward a man with Horace Tilton's body and a skull for a face. She tried to run, but her feet were rooted to the floor. Behind her, her father's voice boomed like thunder. Justice must be served. But justice, she'd learned, was just another word men used to dress up their desires. And in the wild places of the world, perhaps only the scarred and broken understood that truth. The scarred man had been watching the canyon for 3 days when he first spotted the rider. From his perch high on the rimrock, Elias Kane tracked the black mare's stumbling progress through his field glass, noting how the rider swayed in the saddle like wheat in a hard wind. Woman, he'd determined by the second day, young, by the way she held herself when she thought no one was looking, rich by the quality of the horse and tack, and running from something, sure as sunrise. Elias knew the look. He'd worn it himself 5 years back when he'd fled Montana with a bullet in his shoulder and blood on his hands, blood that had been justified. But try explaining that to a bought jury and a crooked judge. He'd kept his distance, curious but cautious. Devil's Throat didn't get many visitors who lived to tell about it. The Apache avoided it, claiming spirits dwelt in the twisted stone. The Mexicans crossed themselves and spat when anyone mentioned the place. Even the desert rats who'd prospect their own graves stayed clear, which made it perfect for a man who preferred shadows to sunlight. But when the woman collapsed and didn't rise, when her fever talk echoed off the canyon walls like the cries of the damned, Elias found himself climbing down from his hiding spot. Maybe it was the way she'd called for her mother. Maybe it was the sight of that fancy mare standing guard over her fallen rider. Or maybe he'd just been alone too long, and even a dying stranger was better than another conversation with the wind. Now he crouched at the cave mouth, studying her in the moonlight. Pretty thing, under all that dust and delirium. Dark hair spilled across the stone like spilled ink. Fine-boned face that spoke of breeding and breakfast served on china plates. Soft hands that had never known anything harder than embroidery needles. She'd die out here. Tomorrow, maybe the day after if she was stubborn about it. Wasn't his problem. He'd learned long ago that getting involved in other people's troubles only led to bullets and regret. But something held him there. Maybe the way her fingers clutched that little pearl-handled derringer like it was a lifeline. Or how young she looked curled up in that threadbare cloak. Damn fool, he muttered to himself. Then louder when she stirred and aimed the toy gun his way. After their brief exchange, after consciousness fled her eyes like smoke, Elias made his decision. He left her the water first, just set his canteen where she'd find it when she woke. If she woke. Added some hardtack and jerky wrapped in cloth. Then he retreated to his own camp higher up the canyon, where he could watch without being seen. She lasted 2 days on what he left. 2 days of fevered rambling and failed attempts to tend her horse. 2 days of him watching her try to build a fire with shaking hands, only to collapse before she could strike a spark. On the 3rd morning, when she lay still as death and the mare began to wander in search of better grazing, Elias climbed down again. Still breathing, he noted, crouching beside her. Her skin burned hot under his palm, and her lips were cracked like old leather. Stubborn little thing, aren't you? He'd nursed men through fever before, shot up outlaws and snake-bit prospectors, men with nothing to lose and less to live for. This couldn't be much different, he told himself, even as he noted the fine cotton of her chemise and the city-soft skin of her hands. Working quickly, he rigged a shelter using her cloak and some juniper branches, creating shade and a windbreak. He bathed her face with cool water, forced a few drops between her lips. When she thrashed and cried out, he held her steady, murmuring nonsense words like he would to a spooked horse. Easy now. Just fever talking. You're safe. Safe. He almost laughed at that. Safe in Devil's Throat with a wanted man for a nurse, but safer than wherever she'd been running from. He reckoned nobody ran this hard from anything good. By evening, her fever broke. She slept natural then, and Elias allowed himself to study her proper early 20s. He'd guess Mexican blood mixing with Anglo somewhere in her line, giving her that olive skin and dark beauty. The kind of woman who'd have men writing bad poetry and shooting each other over dance cards. So what was she doing alone in the Badlands? He was skinning a rabbit for soup when she finally woke proper. He heard the sharp intake of breath, the scramble of hands looking for the weapon she'd dropped. Without turning, he said, "Your pop gun's on the rock to your left, but I'd be obliged if you didn't shoot the man who's fixing your supper." Silence. Then, in a voice rough as his own, "Who are you?" "Name's Elias." He turned then, meeting her dark eyes straight on, letting her get a good look at the ruined side of his face. Most people flinched. She didn't. "And you're the fool girl who thought she could ride into Devil's Throat and live to tell about it." "I'm not going back." There was steel in her voice despite its weakness. "I'll die first." Nearly did. He turned back to the rabbit, stripping meat from bone with practiced efficiency. "Still might, if infection sets in or you're fool enough to try riding out before you're healed." "Why are you helping me?" Now there was a question. Elias considered his answers, discarding the truth that loneliness could drive a man to strange choices, that her fever talk had reminded him of another woman in another life, before bullets and betrayal had carved away everything soft in him. "Maybe I'm curious," he said finally. "Rich girl in a poor woman's dress, riding $1,000 horse into nowhere. That's a story worth hearing." She was quiet so long he thought she'd passed out again. Then, "Clara, my name is Clara." "Well, Clara, you hungry?" She managed a few sips of broth before exhaustion took her again. Elias watched her sleep. This strange bird blown into his territory by an ill wind. Come morning, he'd likely find her trying to saddle that mare with hands too weak to lift leather. She had that look about her, the kind that would rather break than bend. He'd known another woman like that once. She was buried now in Montana soil, put there by men who thought power gave them rights to anything they wanted. The memory sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and sharp-edged. That night, he made his camp close enough to hear if fever took her again, far enough to maintain the illusion of distance. The stars wheeled overhead, and coyotes sang their lonesome songs, and Elias Kane wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Come dawn, she was trying to stand. He watched her grip the canyon wall, knees shaking like a newborn colt's, determination writing itself in every line of her body. "Where you planning on going?" he asked, making her jump. He'd approached silent as smoke old habits died hard. "Away." She didn't look at him, just kept trying to find her feet. "I need to get farther from—" She stopped herself. "From whoever's got you running scared." He set down the coffee he'd brought her. Real coffee he'd been saving for a special occasion that never seemed to come. "Sit down before you fall down. I don't need your help." "No? Then I guess you don't need to know about the Apache war party that passed through the North Canyon yesterday, or that there's a posse riding the Rim Trail, asking questions about a stolen horse and a missing woman." That got her attention. She sank back down, accepting the tin cup with hands that trembled. "How do you know about the posse?" "I make it my business to know who's in my territory." He squatted across from her, keeping distance between them like she was a wild thing that might spook. "They're offering good money for information. $500 for the woman, another $100 for the horse." Her face went pale under its layer of dust. "Dead or alive?" "Didn't specify, though the fat man leading them seemed the type who'd prefer dead. Easier to handle that way." Clara's fingers tightened on the cup until her knuckles went white. "That would be Horace Tilton, my intended husband, as of yesterday." "Ah." Elias pulled out his tobacco pouch, taking his time rolling a cigarette. "And you decided you'd rather take your chances with the desert than with him. The desert's more honest about wanting to kill you." That pulled a laugh from him. Rough and unexpected. "True enough. Though if it's all the same to you, I'd prefer keeping you alive. Corpses are bad for the neighborhood." "Why do you care what happens to me?" He lit his cigarette, considering. "Maybe I don't. Maybe I just don't fancy having lawmen crawling all over my canyon, disturbing my peace. Or maybe—" He met her eyes through the smoke. Maybe I've got a peculiar dislike for fat men who hunt women like deer. She studied him then, really looked at him for the first time. He let her, staying still under her scrutiny. Let her catalog the scar, the sun-damaged skin, the calloused hands and worn leather. Let her see what kind of man made his home in a place even devils avoided. "You're running too," she said finally. "From the law?" "Among other things." Did you do what they say you did?" "Depends on what they're saying." He flicked ash into the sand. "But probably. Question is, did they deserve it?" She surprised him by nodding slowly. "Yes, that's the real question, isn't it? Not what we do, but why." Smart girl. Dangerous thinking for a woman in this world, but smart all the same. "Tell you what. Clara, no last name. You rest up today. Get your strength back. Tomorrow, if you're able, I'll show you a place deeper in the canyons. Harder to find. Easier to defend. You can hole up there until the search parties give up and go home. And then you decide. Mexico's 3 days south if you've got the water for it. California's 2 weeks west if you've got the courage. Or," he shrugged, "you learn to make the desert your home. Wouldn't be the first to disappear out here and make a new life. Like you did. Like I did." She was quiet for a long moment, sipping the coffee and wincing at its bitterness. Finally, "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't." He stood, crushing the cigarette under his boot. "But right now, I'm what you've got. Me and that fancy mare of yours, who's currently trying to seduce my pack mule." That startled a laugh from her, quickly stifled. Sombra always was too friendly for her own good. She's got good instincts. My mule's ornery as hell, but he's survived things that would kill a lesser animal. Kind of like some people I know. He left her then, heading back to his own business, but he made sure to stay within earshot. And when night fell, he built his fire where she could see the light. Trust would come or it wouldn't. But for now, they had an understanding. In the wild places of the world. Sometimes that was enough. 3 weeks passed in the canyon, and Clara learned the rhythm of survival. Dawn meant checking snares with Elias, who moved through the desert like he was part of it. Noon meant finding shade and conserving water while the sun tried to burn the world clean. Dusk meant gathering wood for the night's fire, always small, always hidden from prying eyes above. Elias had built her a proper shelter against the canyon wall. Juniper poles lashed with rawhide, covered with brush and her old cloak. It kept the wind out and the warmth in, though she still woke sometimes expecting silk sheets instead of wool blankets that smelled of smoke and sage. "You're holding it wrong," he said one morning, adjusting her grip on the skinning knife. His hands were careful not to linger on hers. She noticed, always maintaining that careful distance, like she might bolt if he moved too sudden. Blade follows the hide, not the other way around. The rabbit came apart under her clumsy attempts, but he didn't take over. Just guided with words and patience she wouldn't have expected from a man who wore his violence like other men wore cologne. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked, wiping sweat from her brow with a bloody hand. "Here and there?" He was working on his own catch, movements smooth as water. "Army first. Apache taught me some. Rest came from necessity." "You fought in the war." Both sides had their version of right. His knife never paused. "I chose the one that paid better. Turned out to be the wrong choice, but most choices do." She'd learned not to push when his voice went flat like that. Everyone in Devil's Throat was running from ghosts, and some were best left undisturbed. By the 3rd week, she could dress a rabbit clean, start a fire with flint and steel, and tell the difference between water sign and wishful thinking. Her hands grew calluses, her skin darkened from sun, and the woman in the fragment of mirror Elias had given her looked nothing like Judge Whitmore's daughter. "Good," Clara said to her reflection. "Let her be dead." But the past had a way of refusing burial. They came at night, in dreams that left her gasping. Horace's hands, her father's cold eyes, the sound of her mother's last breath rattling in her chest. She'd wake to find Elias sitting by the fire, cleaning his guns or mending tack, never acknowledging her nightmares, but always there. a solid presence between her and the dark. One evening, after a successful hunt had them both in better spirits, she found herself talking. The words came slow at first, then faster, like a dam breaking. "My mother was from Santa Fe," she said, watching the flames dance. "Daughter of a Spanish land-grant family. Scandal of the territory when she married my father. Irish nobody with a law degree and ambition bigger than Texas." Elias listened without interrupting, whittling a piece of juniper into something that might become a spoon. "He loved her then. I remember him bringing her flowers from the desert, staying up all night when she was sick with me, singing Irish songs to make her laugh." Clara pulled her knees to her chest. "But power changes men, or maybe it just reveals what was always there." "Both," Elias said quietly. "Sometimes both. After she died, it was like he decided feeling anything was weakness, and I became currency, something to trade for advancement." She laughed, bitter as alkali water. "The noble Judge Whitmore, selling his daughter to the highest bidder. This Horace Tilton," Elias said carefully. "He hurt you?" "Not yet, but he made his intentions clear. How wives need breaking like horses. How accidents happen on remote ranches." She met his eyes across the fire. "I've seen the women who marry men like him. Empty eyes and careful movements, always watching for the next blow." Elias's hands had gone still on the wood. In the firelight, his scar looked like a crack in marble, deep and irreparable. "Some men need killing," he said finally. "Law's got nothing to do with justice." "Is that what happened to you? You killed someone who needed it?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Her name was Margaret, Maggie, rancher's daughter up in Montana. Hair like wheat and a laugh that could make you believe in God again." He fed a stick to the fire, watching it catch. "I was nobody then, just another hired gun working for whoever paid best. But she saw something in me worth saving." Clara held her breath, afraid to break whatever spell had loosened his tongue. "We had 3 months. 3 months of sneaking around, making plans, pretending the world might let us be. Then her father found out. Decided no scarred-up gunslinger was touching his bloodline." His voice went cold as Winterstone. "So he hired men to fix the problem, only they didn't just come for me?" The fire popped, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Found her in the barn. Made it look like she'd fallen from the loft. Broke her neck. Accident. Everyone said, tragedy. But I knew, and they knew I knew." He looked up then, and Clara saw the killer he'd been, maybe still was. "Took me 6 months to hunt them all down. Her father went last, made sure he knew why." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Don't be. I made my choices." He went back to his whittling, each stroke precise and controlled. "But you see now why I stay out here. Desert doesn't judge, doesn't ask for more than you can give. Is that what I am?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Something the desert brought you?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed as a nerve. "Haven't decided yet." That night, she lay in her shelter listening to the wind sing through the canyon walls. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called, and its mate answered. The sound made her chest ache with a loneliness she couldn't name. When she emerged for her dawn necessities, she found him already up, standing at the canyon's edge with his rifle, watching the rim trail. "Trouble?" she asked. "Maybe dust trail yesterday evening, moving slow. Could be nothing." But his shoulders held tension like a drawn bow, and Clara had learned to read his moods like weather sign. They spent the day preparing, filling water containers, checking weapons, packing essentials in case they needed to move fast. Elias showed her how to load his spare revolver, a .44 that kicked like a mule but would stop a man cold. "You remember what I taught you? Squeeze, don't pull, both eyes open, aim for the chest, and don't hesitate. Hesitation gets you killed." He nodded, satisfied. "You're learning." That night came wild with storm. Lightning split the sky, and thunder rolled through the canyons like God's own laughter. Rain fell in sheets, turning their careful fire to hissing steam. They huddled in the shelter, closer than they'd ever been. Clara could smell leather and tobacco, gunpowder and something essentially male that made her pulse quicken. When lightning illuminated his face, she saw him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "Elias," she started, not knowing what she meant to say. He shook his head. "Just once. Don't." But she was tired of being careful, tired of maintaining distances. The storm had woken something wild in her, or maybe it had always been there, waiting. She reached out, fingertips barely grazing the ruined side of his face. He caught her wrist, not rough but firm. "You don't know what you're doing." "Yes, I do. I'm not some hero from a storybook. Clara, I'm a killer with blood on my hands and a price on my head. You touch me, you become part of that. I'm already running for my life, already living like an outlaw. What's one more sin?" His grip gentled but didn't release her. "Because you can still go back. Find another town, another name, make a clean life. But this," he gestured between them, "this burns everything clean away. No going back from it." She turned her hand in his grip until their fingers intertwined. "Maybe I don't want to go back. Maybe I want to burn." Lightning flashed again, showing the war in his eyes. Want against wisdom, need against knowledge. She'd seen the same battle in her mirror each night, watching him move through firelight like some wild spirit of the desert. He released her hand and turned away. "Storm's passing. Get some sleep." Clara lay back, frustration and rejection burning hot in her chest. But just before dawn, when the world held its breath between night and day, she woke to find him sitting just inside the shelter's entrance, rifle across his knees, standing guard between her and whatever might come. "Thought you were asleep," she murmured. "Someone needs to watch. You can't protect me forever." "No," he agreed. "But I can try for tonight." She sat up, blanket pooled around her waist. "I'm not her. I'm not Maggie." "I know." His voice was rough as sandstone. "That's what scares me." Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving, rifle coming up. "Get dressed. Quick. We've got company coming." Clara scrambled for her clothes, heart hammering. Through the shelter's entrance, she could see riders picking their way down the trail. 5, maybe 6, even at distance. She recognized the bulk of Horace Tilton. "They found us." "Not yet." Elias was already packing. Movements economical and sure. Trail forks below. They might pass by. But his hand never left his gun. And Clara knew their sanctuary was ending. The world had found them at last, and all their careful distances might not be enough to keep the blood from flowing. The riders passed below without stopping, but Elias knew their luck had run thin as winter ice. He watched them disappear around the bend. Horace Tilton's bulk unmistakable even at distance, and made his calculations. "Pack light," he told Clara, already rolling his own gear. "We leave at nightfall." She didn't argue, just began filling her canvas bag with the essentials he'd taught her. Water, dried meat, ammunition, the small medicine kit he'd put together from desert plants. Her movements were steady. But he caught the tremor in her hands when she thought he wasn't looking. "Where?" she asked simply. "Black Mesa. 2 days hard riding, but I've got a place there. More hidden than this." He didn't mention it was his last hideout, the one he'd kept in reserve against the day when even Devil's Throat became too crowded. After Black Mesa, there was only Mexico. And Mexico meant never coming back. They spent the day erasing signs of habitation, scattering the fire rings, taking down the shelter, brushing out tracks with juniper branches. By the time the sun started its descent, the canyon looked as untouched as the day Clara had stumbled into it. "Will they come back?" she asked, checking Sombra's saddle one final time. "Count on it. Tilton's got pride involved now, and pride makes men stupid. He'll search every crack and crevice until he finds what he's looking for." They rode out as stars began to prick the darkening sky. Elias led them through passages Clara hadn't known existed, narrow defiles where they had to dismount and lead the horses, their hooves wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. His mule, Samson, picked his way sure-footed as a goat, while Sombra followed with the trust of an animal that had learned these humans meant survival. By midnight, they were climbing out of Devil's Throat entirely, emerging onto a plateau where the wind hit like a physical thing. Clara pulled her cloak tighter, grateful for the wool layers Elias had insisted she wear. "No fires from here on," he said, passing her a canteen. "No talking louder than a whisper. Sound carries strange out here." They rode through the night, navigating by stars and Elias's uncanny knowledge of the land. When dawn painted the eastern sky pale pink, they were miles from any trail Clara had ever seen on her father's maps. "Rest the horses," Elias said, dismounting near a cluster of rocks that offered minimal shelter. 2 hours. No more." Clara slid from the saddle, legs trembling from the long ride. Without thinking, she reached for him as her knees buckled. He caught her, steadied her, and for a moment they stood pressed together in the growing light. "Steady," he murmured, but his hands lingered on her waist a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I'm fine." She stepped back, wrapping dignity around her like armor. "Just tired." They dozed fitfully in what shade they could find, taking turns watching the horizon. No dust clouds, no movement except a pair of eagles circling on thermals high above, but the feeling of being hunted pressed on them like weight. The second night brought them to the edge of Black Mesa's shadow. Clara had thought Devil's Throat was desolate, but this was different. A moonscape of black rock and ancient lava flows, beautiful in its sterility. "Volcanic," Elias explained, leading them up a trail that seemed to exist more in his memory than reality. "Whole area burned thousands of years ago. Apaches say the spirits of fire still live here." "Do you believe that?" "I believe it keeps people away, and that's good enough." His hideout proved to be more than the cave she'd expected. Someone? Elias, she realized, had built a small cabin tucked into a fold of the mesa, invisible from below and defensible from above. Adobe walls thick as her arm. A good roof of pine logs and packed earth, even a corral for the animals protected by natural rock walls. "When?" she asked, amazed. 3 years back, took most of a winter. He was already unsaddling Samson. Movements automatic. Figured I'd need a last stand someday. Inside, the cabin held surprises. A real bed with a straw mattress. Shelves stocked with preserved food. Even books wrapped careful in oilcloth. Clara picked one up, recognizing Virgil's Aeneid in Latin. "You read the classics?" He shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. "Man's got to do something with the long nights." She opened the book, found notes in the margins written in a careful, educated hand. Another piece of the puzzle that was Elias Cain Killer, protector, scholar of dead languages. They settled into a routine different from the canyon. More walls between them, more space, but somehow the distance felt smaller. Maybe it was the domesticity of it, sharing meals at the rough table he'd built, taking turns with the wash basin, reading by lamplight while wind howled outside. "You could have been anything," Clara said one night, watching him clean his rifle with the same precision he brought to everything. "Why this life?" Could ask you the same. Judge's daughter could have married well, lived in comfort. Why run? Because comfort built on lies is just another kind of prison. He looked up at that, lamplight catching the planes of his face. "That why you asked me to touch you, back in the storm?" Heat climbed her neck. "I asked because I wanted to. Because for once in my life, I wanted something that was my choice, not decided by committee or convention. And if I'd said yes, then we'd both have made a choice." She met his eyes steady. "But you decided for both of us. For your own good. My father used to say that too." The words hit like a slap. Elias set down the rifle, jaw tight. "I'm nothing like your father." "No," Clara agreed. "He only wanted to control my body. You want to control my heart. That's not—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. Then explain it." But he was already moving, grabbing his coat. "Need to check the perimeter." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the lamp and the wind and the ache of words unsaid. She found him later on the mesa's edge, silhouetted against stars. The night was cold enough to see breath, and she pulled her cloak tight as she approached. "Seen something?" "No." He didn't turn. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit." That pulled a laugh from him, short and harsh. "Everything about this is dangerous. Clara, you, me, this whole damn situation." "I know." "Do you?" He turned then, and even in starlight she could see the intensity in his eyes. "You think you know what you're asking for, but you don't. You see some romantic exile, some noble outlaw, but I've done things that would turn your stomach, killed men for money, for pride, for revenge, sometimes just because they were in my way. I'm not asking you to be someone else. Then what are you asking?" She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. Just to stop deciding what's best for me, like I'm a child or a saint on a pedestal. I'm neither. I know what you are." His voice went rough. "You're brave and smart and so damn beautiful it hurts to look at you sometimes. You're everything I gave up believing in, Elias. And that's why I can't. Because you deserve better than a man who's only good at leaving graves behind him. Because when this is over, and it will be over, you need to be able to walk away clean." "What if I don't want clean? What if I want real?" He cupped her face then, thumb tracing her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. "Real is me putting a bullet in Tilton's head and watching you hate me for it. Real is living looking over our shoulders, never having a home that lasts more than a season. Real is me teaching you to be like me, and that's the last thing this world needs." She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. "You're not the monster you think you are." "No," he agreed. "I'm worse, because I look at you and think maybe I could be something else, and that kind of hope is dangerous for men like me." He pulled away, stepped back. "Storm coming. We should get inside." Clara looked at the clear sky, the brilliant stars, but didn't argue. The storm he meant had nothing to do with weather. That night, she lay in the bed while he took the floor, as had become their custom. Through the thin walls, she could hear coyotes calling, and something that might have been a mountain cat. The wild sounds should have frightened her, but they'd become familiar as lullabies. "Tell me about after," she said to the darkness. "After they stop looking, after we're just two more ghosts in the desert." His voice came quiet from the floor. "There is no after. Not for me." "Pretend there is." A long pause. Then, "After, you go to California. Change your name to something common. Mary or Anne or Jane. You find work as a governess, maybe. Or a shop girl. You meet some steady man who doesn't ask about your past. You have babies and plant gardens and grow old on some porch watching sunsets. That's my after. What's yours?" "I told you, there isn't one." "Pretend," she insisted. Another pause. Longer. "After, I find some valley so remote maps don't show it. Build another cabin, maybe run a few cattle, read all the books I've been meaning to. Watch the seasons change. Die quiet in my bed instead of bleeding out in some dusty street." Alone. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. Life at Black Mesa took on a rhythm that felt dangerous in its domesticity. Clara woke each dawn to find coffee already made, Elias having risen before first light to scout the perimeter. She'd cook breakfast while he tended the animals, and they'd eat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the volcanic rock in shades of red and gold. "You're getting better with that," he said one morning, nodding at the biscuits she'd managed not to burn. "Had a good teacher," she replied, remembering his patient instruction on using the Dutch oven he'd packed up here 3 years ago. He almost smiled at that, the expression softening the harsh lines of his face. These moments came more frequently now, little cracks in the armor he wore like second skin. Days were for survival tasks. Clara learned to preserve meat with salt and smoke, to identify edible plants from deadly ones, to read weather in cloud formations and wind patterns. Elias taught her to shoot his rifle, setting up targets at increasing distances until she could hit a tin can at 100 yards. "Natural eye for it," he commented after she'd put 3 shots through the same hole. "Your mother's blood. Maybe. Spanish women always did shoot better than their men claimed. How do you know about Spanish women? Spent time in Sonora after the war. Learned quick that underestimating them was a good way to end up dead or married. Which were you afraid of more? Depends on the day. It was the closest he'd come to flirtation. And Clara treasured it like found gold. Evenings belonged to quieter pursuits. Elias had more books than she'd expected. Poetry and philosophy mixed with practical manuals on everything from veterinary medicine to mineralogy. They'd read by lamplight, sometimes aloud when a passage particularly struck them. "Listen to this," Clara said one night, reading from Marcus Aurelius. "What we cannot bear removes us from life. What lasts can be borne." Elias looked up from cleaning his pistol. Romans had a point. Man can get used to anything if he lives through it long enough. Is that what you've done, gotten used to being alone? Was never alone before, just hadn't met the right company. The words hung between them like smoke. Clara felt her heart skip, but before she could respond, he was back to his gun. The moment passing like all the others. It was the waiting that wore on them. Each day without sign of pursuit should have brought relief, but instead the tension wound tighter. Elias grew more watchful, spending hours glassing the approaches through his field telescope. Clara caught him starting at small sounds, a rock falling, a bird's sudden flight. "They're not giving up," he said one afternoon, studying dust in the far distance that might have been riders or might have been antelope. "Maybe they are. It's been 2 weeks. Men like Tilton don't forget humiliation, and your father won't stop until he knows for certain what happened to you. Then let me write to him. Tell him I'm safe, that I left by choice." "No." The word came sharp. "Any contact puts us at risk. Besides, you think he'd accept that? His daughter choosing to live rough with an outlaw over marriage to his chosen man?" Clara knew he was right, but the knowledge sat bitter. Somewhere, her father might be mourning her as dead. And despite everything, she couldn't quite kill the part of her that cared. The breaking point came on a night when the moon hung full and bright as a silver dollar. Clara woke to find Elias's bedroll empty, the cabin door standing open. She found him by the corral, saddling Samson with quick, efficient movements. "Where are you going?" He didn't look at her. "Spotted a campfire, northwest, maybe 5 miles. Could be hunters, could be trouble. Either way, need to know. I'll come with you." "No." He turned then, and she saw the wildness in him, the caged thing that weeks of domestic peace had only masked, not tamed. "You stay here, bar the door. Anyone but me comes. You take Sombra and ride south hard. Don't stop until you hit Mexico. Elias." But he was already mounting, rifle across his saddle. "I mean it. Clara, promise me." "I promise nothing except that I'll be here when you get back." Something flickered in his eyes, frustration, fear, maybe something deeper. Then he was gone. Samson picking his way down the trail, sure-footed in the moonlight. Clara barred the door as instructed, but couldn't settle. She paced the small cabin, checked and rechecked the loads in both pistols, watched the moon track across the sky. An hour passed, 2, when hoofbeats finally sounded outside. She nearly wept with relief, but the rhythm was wrong. Too many horses, moving too fast. She grabbed Elias's spare rifle, took position by the window. "Clara," Elias's voice, raw with urgency. "We're leaving, now." She unbarred the door to find him already throwing gear onto Samson. His shirt was torn, blood seeping through at the shoulder. "You're hurt." "No time. They're maybe 20 minutes behind. Bounty hunters. Not Tilton's men, but they've got our trail." She didn't waste breath on questions. Just grabbed her bag and started saddling Sombra. Her hands shook but didn't falter. All those dawn drills, all his patient teaching, came down to this moment. They rode hard into the desert night, following paths that existed more in Elias's memory than physical reality. Behind them, Clara could hear pursuit shouts, hoofbeats, once the crack of a rifle, though they were well out of range. "How many?" she called over the wind. 6, maybe 7. Elias sat his saddle steady despite the blood. "Professional manhunters. Someone upped the price on my head." They rode for hours, pushing the horses to their limits. When Sombra began to stumble, foam flecking her mouth, Elias led them into a maze of standing stones, ancient sandstone pillars carved by wind into fantastic shapes. "Rest," he commanded, sliding from Samson with a grunt of pain. "Horses can't go further without water." Clara was beside him instantly, pulling his shirt away from the wound. "Bullet. Grazed. Looks worse than it is." She cleaned it best she could with water from her canteen, tore strips from her petticoat for bandages. His skin was hot under her hands, slick with sweat and blood. "Should have left me in that canyon," she said, tying off the bandage. "This is my fault. They're using me to flush you out." "No." He caught her hand, held it tight. "This was always coming. You just gave me a reason to care about surviving it." The moon was setting, darkness growing thick, when they heard horses entering the stones. Elias pressed a finger to his lips, pointed to a narrow crack between two pillars. Clara squeezed through, found herself in a natural chamber barely big enough for two people. Elias followed, pulling brush across the entrance. They pressed together in the darkness, his body sheltering hers, his breathing carefully controlled despite the pain she knew he felt. Voices drifted through the stones. "Lost them here somewhere. Spread out. Check every crevice." Clara felt Elias tense, his hand moving to his gun. She covered it with her own. A silent plea. He could take some of them, maybe, but not all. Not wounded, not in the open. Footsteps approached their hiding spot. A shadow passed across the brush. Clara held her breath, pressed her face into Elias's chest, felt his heart beating strong and steady against her cheek. "Nothing here," a voice called. "Must have doubled back." The footsteps moved away. They waited, counting heartbeats, until the sound of horses faded into distance. "They'll be back," Elias whispered against her hair. "Come dawn, they'll pick up our trail again. Then we don't wait for dawn." But neither of them moved. In the absolute darkness of their hiding place, walls dissolved. Clara lifted her face, found his mouth with hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and blood and need too long denied. "Clara," he breathed against her lips. A warning, a plea, a surrender. "I know," she whispered back. "I know what this means. I know what we are. I don't care anymore." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she could feel the shift between them. A line crossed, a decision made. "All right," he said softly. "All right. We do this together, then. Whatever comes." They slipped from the stones an hour before dawn, leading the horses until they were clear. Elias knew a spring 2 hours south, hidden in a box canyon. They'd rest there, water the animals, plan their next move. "Mexico?" Clara asked as they rode. "Not yet. First we deal with the hunters. Can't run forever with them on our trail." "Deal with them how?" He looked at her, his face hard in the pre-dawn light. "The only way I know." Clara thought of the man she'd been kissing an hour ago, gentle despite his strength. Thought of the man who read Virgil by lamplight and spoke of valleys where he might die peaceful in his bed. Thought of the killer he'd warned her he was. "Teach me," she said. "Whatever needs doing. Teach me to help." "You sure? This isn't target practice anymore. This is—" "I know what it is." She met his eyes steady. "I made my choice in those stones. I choose you. All of you. Even the parts that come with blood on their hands." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Once." "Then God help us both," he said, and turned his face toward the rising sun. The spring in the box canyon gave them water and a few hours' rest. But Elias knew their time was running short. He sat with his back against a boulder, watching Clara sleep fitfully in the shade, and made his calculations. 7 hunters, maybe 6 if he'd hit one in the exchange at Black Mesa. Professional killers who knew their trade, and now Clara was part of it. The kiss in the stones had changed everything, broken down the last wall he'd built between them. He should regret it. Should have kept that distance. But looking at her now, dusty and worn but still fighting, he couldn't summon the feeling. She woke as the sun reached its peak, immediately alert. How long? 3 hours, maybe 4 before they pick up our trail again. Then we should move. No. He pulled out his field glass, began studying the canyon walls. Running just delays the inevitable. Time to change the game. Clara moved beside him, close enough that he caught her scent despite the dust and sweat. What are you thinking? Ambush. Turn the hunters into hunted. He pointed to a narrow defile visible from their position. They'll have to come through there if they follow our tracks. 1 shooter could hold it for a while. 2 shooters, Clara corrected. He looked at her, saw the determination in her eyes. No point arguing. You ever kill a man? No. It's not like shooting cans. When you see a man's face in your sights, know that pulling the trigger ends everything he was or might be. They're trying to kill us. Clara interrupted. That makes it simple. Nothing about killing was simple. But Elias kept that thought to himself. If they survived this, she'd learn the weight of it soon enough. They spent the afternoon preparing. Elias showed her how to build a sniper's rest from stones, how to gauge wind and distance, how to breathe steady when your heart wanted to race. Don't aim for the head, he instructed. Center mass, bigger target, more certain, like you did with the men who killed Maggie. The question caught him off guard. No, that was different. How? That was personal? This is just business. Clara checked the loads in her rifle with steady hands. Everything about this feels personal to me. As shadows grew long, they took position in the rocks above the defile. Elias had chosen well. Good cover, clear fields of fire, and a hidden trail out the back if things went bad. He'd seen worse places to make a stand. Remember, he said quietly, first shot's the easiest. It's the second that tells you who you are. They didn't have long to wait. As the sun touched the western peaks, dust rose in the distance. Riders coming fast but careful, spread out to make harder targets. These weren't the usual bounty trash. These were men who'd done this before. 6, Clara whispered. Counting. You did hit one. Elias studied them through his glass. Hard faces, well-armed, moving with the coordination of men who'd ridden together before. The leader was a thin man with silver in his beard, carrying a sharp's rifle that could reach out and touch them if he knew where to look. Let them enter the defile, Elias murmured. Wait for my shot. The hunters slowed as they approached the narrow passage, instincts warning them. But the tracks led through, clear as scripture in the sandy bottom. After a brief conference, they proceeded single file. Elias settled his rifle, found the leader in his sights. Beside him, Clara matched his breathing, synchronized like dancers. The moment stretched taut as wire. The crack of Elias's rifle shattered the evening quiet. The leader tumbled from his saddle, his sharp spinning away into the rocks. Before the echo died, Clara fired. Her target jerked but kept his seat, spurring his horse forward. Then chaos. The hunters scattered, seeking cover, returning fire at the muzzle flashes. Rock chips exploded near Clara's position as bullets sought them. She ducked, hands shaking now as the reality hit. Load, Elias commanded, already sighting his next target. Count to 3, rise, fire, drop. Don't think, just do. She obeyed, moving on instinct and training. Rise, fire, drop. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, familiar as breathing now. A man screamed somewhere below. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but felt like hours. When the gunfire finally ceased, 3 hunters lay still in the defile. The others had pulled back, taking cover behind boulders just out of effective range. Now what? Clara asked, voice steady despite the white showing around her eyes. Now they wait for dark. Try to flank us, or... A voice called out from below, professionally calm. Kane, Elias Kane, let's talk terms. Nothing to talk about, Elias called back. Sure there is. We're not after the woman. Let her ride out. We'll finish our business with you clean. Clara's hand found his arm. Don't even think about it. Wasn't planning to. He raised his voice again. No deal. Then you're both dead come full dark. That girl's blood is on your hands. Elias felt Clara flinch at that, but her grip on her rifle never wavered. That's my girl, he thought, then wondered when he'd started thinking of her as his. The standoff stretched as shadows deepened. Elias knew the hunters would move soon. Probably split up. Try to get above them. He and Clara could retreat down the back trail, but that meant giving up their position, running blind in the dark. Elias, Clara said suddenly. The boy. He followed her gaze, saw what she'd spotted, among the horses milling in the defile. One carried a smaller figure slumped in the saddle, not dead, moving weakly, hands tied to the saddle horn. Jesus, Elias breathed. The boy couldn't be more than 15. Face bloody and clothes torn. What the hell? Another voice from below. Younger, angrier. That's Tilton's nephew. Kid tried to follow us, play hero. We figured he might be useful leverage. Clara's face had gone pale. James, Horace's sister's boy. He used to bring me flowers when... She stopped, jaw tightening. We can't leave him. It's a trap. I don't care. Elias studied the situation. The boy's horse stood in partial cover, but anyone trying to reach him would be exposed for crucial seconds. The hunters knew it too. Bait in a killing field. All right, he said finally. But we do this smart. He explained quickly, watching understanding dawn in Clara's eyes. It was risky, maybe foolish, but leaving a boy to die went against even his flexible code. Ready? She nodded, checking her pistol one last time. Elias rose slightly. Rifle tracking. Hey, you want cane? Here's your chance. He fired 3 shots rapid, not really aiming, just keeping heads down. Then he was moving, scrambling along the ridge while Clara held position, her rifle cracking steadily to cover him. The hunters took the bait, focusing on his movement, trying to get a clear shot at the infamous Elias Kane, which meant they weren't watching Clara slip down the back trail, circling wide through the growing darkness. Elias kept moving, firing occasionally, drawing their attention like a matador with a bull. Bullets whined off rocks around him, coming closer as the hunters found their range, just a little longer. Then Clara was at the horses, knife flashing as she cut the boy's bonds. He nearly fell, but she steadied him, helped him slide to the ground. That's when one of the hunters spotted her. The woman! She's... Elias's rifle spoke, and the man's warning ended in a gurgle. But now they knew. We're turning. And Clara was in the open with 30 feet to cover and a half-conscious boy leaning on her shoulder. She didn't try to run. Instead, she drew her pistol and walked steady, firing at muzzle flashes with the same calm precision she'd shown at target practice. Beside her, the boy stumbled but kept moving, some reserve of courage keeping him upright. A hunter rose from cover, rifle swinging toward them. Elias dropped him before he could fire. Another tried to flank them. Clara's pistol barked twice, and he stumbled back, clutching his chest. Then they were in the rocks, in cover, the boy gasping but alive. Elias slid down beside them as bullets chewed the stone where he'd been. 2 left, he panted. They'll rush us or run. Mr. Kane. The boy's voice was weak but clear. That you? Aunt Clara? Hush, James, Clara soothed. Save your strength. Came to rescue you. From him. The boy's eyes found Elias, confused. But you're together? It's complicated, Clara said. A laugh bubbled from the boy's split lips. Everything's complicated with you. Aunt Clara? Uncle Horace says? Later. Elias interrupted. Movement in the rocks below. Company coming. The last 2 hunters came smart but desperate, laying down covering fire while leapfrogging between boulders. Good tactics, but they'd lost too many men. We're fighting shadows and ghosts now. Elias waited until one showed clear, dropped him clean. The last man broke and ran for the horses. Clara's rifle tracked him, but she hesitated. Let him go, Elias said quietly. Someone should carry the word. They watched the lone survivor gallop away into the darkness. Then silence settled over the defile, broken only by the boy's labored breathing. We need to get him somewhere safe. Clara said. "The spring, we'll patch him up, then figure out next moves." As they helped the boy back to the horses, Elias caught Clara's arm. "You did good, real good." She looked back at the bodies scattered in the defile, and he saw the cost of it in her eyes. "They would have killed us." "Yes. Then why do I feel like I've lost something I'll never get back?" He pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Because you have. That's what survival costs. Question is whether living's worth the price." She leaned into him for a moment, drawing strength. "With you, yes." They made their way back to the spring under stars that seemed dimmer than before. Behind them, coyotes began to gather, drawn by the scent of death. And somewhere in the distance, a lone rider carried news that would bring more violence, more choices, more prices to be paid. But for tonight, they were alive. In this hard land, sometimes that was enough. The boy's fever broke on the third day. Clara had tended him with the same steady hands that had held a rifle in the defile, cleaning wounds, forcing water between cracked lips, keeping watch while Elias scouted for pursuit. Young James Tilton proved tougher than his uncle, surviving despite 2 bullet grazes and a knife cut that would leave its own scar. "Aunt Clara," his voice came weak but clear as she changed his bandages. "Uncle Horace said you were kidnapped, said this outlaw Kane forced you." Clara's hands stilled on the linen. "What do you think, James?" The boy studied her, then looked at Elias cleaning weapons nearby. "I think Uncle Horace says a lot of things that aren't true, like when he told Papa those homesteaders' wells went dry natural-like. Smart boy. Too smart for his own good. Maybe." "Why did you follow us?" Clara asked. "Wanted to be a hero, save you like in the stories." He laughed, bitter for one so young. "Instead, you saved me. We saved you." Elias corrected without looking up. "Your aunt's handy with a gun." James absorbed this, another crack in whatever world he'd believed in. "They're saying things in town, about you, both of you." "Let them talk," Clara said. "Grandfather Whitmore posted $1,000 for your return, $500 for Kane, dead or alive." The boy winced as Clara tied off the bandage. Uncle Horace added another 1,000 of his own money, but only if Kane's brought in dead. "Generous of him," Elias remarked dryly. "He's scared." James said simply, "Of what Aunt Clara might say at a trial. About the marriage arrangement. About other things." Clara and Elias exchanged looks. The boy knew more than a child should about adult darkness. "Soon as you're able to ride, we'll take you close enough to town," Elias decided. "You can make your own way from there." "What do I tell them?" "The truth," Clara said. "That you found us, got caught in a fight with bounty hunters, and we patched you up. What you say about the rest is your choice." James was quiet a long moment. "Mama always said you were different. Aunt Clara said you had too much spine for your own good." He looked at Elias. "Guess you found someone who appreciates that." They moved camp that night, Elias not trusting their position despite days without sign of pursuit. The boy rode without complaint, though Clara could see the pain in how he held himself. They made a strange procession through the moonlit desert. The scarred outlaw, the runaway bride, and the would-be hero who'd learned that real life wrote different stories than books. Their new camp was little more than an overhang of rock near a seep spring, but defensible and hidden. As Clara helped James from his horse, Elias pulled her aside. "This changes things. Boy knows where we are, which direction we're heading. He won't betray us. Maybe not intentional, but Tilton's his blood, and your father knows how to pressure people, how to make them talk." Clara looked back at James, saw her own younger self in his confusion and disillusionment. "Then we give him a different story to tell." That night, as James slept fitfully between them, Clara outlined her plan. Elias listened without interrupting, though she could see the resistance building in his eyes. "No," he said when she finished. "Absolutely not. It's the only way. I go back, face them down, tell my truth in open court. They'll never let you speak. Your father will have you declared hysterical, locked away for your own good, or Tilton will arrange an accident. Not if I have witnesses. Not if the whole town's watching. Clara, I'm tired of running. Elias, tired of letting them dictate the terms. She kept her voice low but fierce. They want their property back? Fine, but they'll get more than they bargained for. And if they kill you, then you'll do what you do best. She met his eyes steady in the firelight. But I don't think they will. Not in public, not with questions already being asked. Elias was silent long enough that she thought he'd refuse outright. Then, if we do this, and I'm not saying yes, we do it my way. You don't go alone, and you don't go unprepared. Relief flooded through her. What do you have in mind? Give me 2 days. There's people owe me favors. Might be willing to even the odd sum. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. This is crazy. You know that? Learn from the best. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. When they broke apart, James was watching them with eyes too knowing for his years. For what it's worth, the boy said quietly. I think you're right, about facing them. Mama always said the only way past a snake is through it. 2 days later, they sat a horse on the ridge overlooking Las Cruces. The town sprawled below in the afternoon sun, looking peaceful as a painting. Looks were deceiving. Clara knew, underneath that calm surface, deals were being made, justice was being bought, and powerful men were deciding who lived free and who didn't. Last chance to change your mind, Elias said. Clara straightened her shoulders, checked the derringer hidden in her boot. She wore her mother's cloak despite the heat, needing that connection to the woman who'd taught her to be strong. I'm ready. James rode between them, still pale but sitting straight. He'd insisted on coming, said it was his duty to see this through. Clara suspected he just wanted to watch the fireworks. They rode down together. 3 unlikely allies entering town like something out of the wild tales the newspapers loved to print. People stopped in the streets to stare. Women pulled their children close. Men reached for weapons they weren't wearing. Clara, Mrs. Morrison from the general store gaped. Clara Whitmore? Lord in heaven. Child, we thought you were dead. Not dead, Mrs. Morrison. Just learning some truths about the world. Word spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Clara spotted familiar faces, some sympathetic, others hostile, all curious about the judge's daughter who'd run off with an outlaw and lived to ride back in. Judge Whitmore appeared on the courthouse steps, flanked by armed men. His face showed nothing, but Clara knew him well enough to see the fury beneath that calm surface. Clara, come inside. We'll discuss this privately. No. She stayed mounted, letting the crowd hear every word. Whatever needs discussing, we do it here, in the open, like honest folk. You're overwrought. Not yourself. This man saved my life. Clara interrupted, multiple times, while the one you tried to sell me to sent killers after us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Horace Tilton pushed forward, face red with rage and drink. Lies. She's been corrupted by this outlaw, twisted to his purposes. The only twisting here was you and my father deciding my future over whiskey and land deals. Clara shot back. Tell them, Horace, tell them about our wedding night plans, about how wives need breaking like horses. The crowd's murmur grew uglier. Some of the women were looking at Tilton with new eyes, perhaps remembering their own daughters. Enough! Judge Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. Marshal, arrest that man. The charges are kidnapping, murder, and corrupting a virtuous woman. The marshal, a steady man named Cooper who'd held the position since Clara was small, looked uncomfortable. Judge, maybe we should hear the whole story first. The boy there looks like he's got something to say. James nudged his horse forward. It's true, all of it. Uncle Horace bragged about what he'd do once they were married, and those bounty hunters would have killed me too if Mr. Kane and Aunt Clara hadn't stopped them. The boy's confused, Tilton blustered. Injured, Not thinking clear? Clear enough to know right from wrong, James said, young voice carrying surprising authority. Clear enough to know Aunt Clara deserves better than being traded like cattle. The crowd was fully engaged now, taking sides, arguing among themselves. Clara saw her moment. I'll make this simple, she called out. I'm of age. I choose my own path, and I choose to leave this town of my own free will, with whoever I please. Any who try to stop me will answer for it. You're my daughter. Judge Whitmore stepped forward. You'll do as you're told. No, Elias spoke for the first time, voice carrying quiet menace. She won't. Every eye turned to the scarred outlaw. He sat his horse easy, hand nowhere near his gun, but the threat was clear in every line of his body. You touch her against her will, any of you, and we'll have a different conversation, one that involves considerable bloodshed. He smiled, the expression pulling his scar into something frightening. I've killed men for less than forcing a woman. Ask around Montana if you doubt it. You threatening a judge? Marshal Cooper asked carefully. Stating facts, man's got a right to protect what's his. I'm not his property, Clara said firmly. Not his or anyone's, but I stand with him by choice. And if you want to take me, you'll have to go through him. And me, James added unexpectedly. Aunt Clara saved my life. I owe her that much loyalty at least. The standoff stretched taut. Clara could see her father calculating, Tilton sweating, the crowd waiting to see which way the wind would blow. This was the moment that would decide everything. Then a woman's voice from the crowd. Let her go. Judge, let her choose her happiness. It was Mrs. Sandoval, the minister's wife. Others took up the cry. Mostly women, but some men too. People who'd known Clara since birth, who'd watched her mother die and her father change, who understood that sometimes the law and justice were different things. Judge Whitmore's face went white with rage, but he was a political animal above all. He could count the voices, see which way public sentiment was flowing. If you leave, he said coldly, you're dead to me. No inheritance, no name, nothing. I'll keep the name, Clara said. It was my mother's before it was yours. As for the rest, she looked at Elias, saw her future in his dark eyes. I've got everything I need. She turned sombra, and the crowd parted like water. Elias fell in beside her, rifle across his saddle, watching for any false move. James followed, looking back once at his uncle with something like pity. They rode out of Las Cruces as the sun touched the western mountains, 3 figures against the dying light. Behind them, a town struggled to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Ahead lay the desert, vast and unforgiving but honest in its dangers. Where now? Clara asked as the last buildings fell behind. Mexico, Elias said. Like we planned. New names, new life. Together, he reached across the space between horses, took her hand. If you'll have me, scars and all. The scars are part of the whole. She said, I wouldn't change them. They rode on into the gathering darkness, leaving judgment and false justice behind. In 3 days they'd cross the border. In a week they'd be ghosts, gone beyond the reach of warrant or writ. But tonight they were just 3 souls who'd found unlikely alliance in chaos, riding toward whatever tomorrow would bring. And for Clara, that was freedom enough. The Rio Grande ran low in the late summer heat, its waters brown with silt, but still marking the boundary between what was and what could be. Clara sat her horse at the river's edge, watching the sun paint the Mexican mountains purple and gold. Behind her, Elias conferred quietly with James, giving the boy final instructions for his journey home. You remember what we discussed? Elias asked. Yes, sir. I fell off my horse in the desert, got lost for a week, made it back on my own. Never saw either of you after the fight with the bounty hunters. Good boy. And the money? James patted the pouch at his belt, enough gold to see him established somewhere away from his uncle's influence. I'm thinking California. Maybe try my hand at lawyering, like Grandfather Whitmore before he forgot what justice meant. Clara turned sombra back to them. You don't have to protect us. James, tell the truth if it helps you. The truth is what I make it, the boy said, sounding older than his years. Besides, Uncle Horace has gotten too comfortable with his lies. Time someone in the family remembered what honor looks like. They parted at the river, James heading north while Clara and Elias crossed into Mexico. The water was warm around the horse's legs, and Clara felt something wash away with each step, not her past, which would always be part of her, but its hold on her future, on the Mexican side. Elias led them to a small village where a priest waited, old and bent, but with kind eyes that had seen too much to judge anymore. The ceremony was simple, conducted in Spanish that Clara's mother had taught her years ago. No white dress, no flowers, no guests, except for an old woman who served as witness in exchange for a silver dollar. "Do you take this man, with all his shadows and scars?" the priest asked in careful English. "I do." "And you, Señor, do you take this woman, with all her strength and sorrow, until the mountains fall to dust?" Elias answered, "The poetry unexpected but right." They exchanged rings made from melted coins, hammered smooth by a local blacksmith who asked no questions, when the priest pronounced them married. Clara kissed her husband in the little chapel while late afternoon light streamed through colored glass, painting them both in shades of redemption. That night, in a room above the village cantina, they came together as husband and wife. Elias was gentle despite his rough hands, treating her like something precious but not fragile. Clara gave herself completely, holding nothing back, and in the darkness found a kind of peace she'd never known existed. "My wife," Elias murmured against her hair as they lay entwined afterward. "My husband," she replied, the words feeling like both an ending and a beginning. They stayed in the village 3 days, long enough for Elias to arrange new papers. Clara Whitmore became Clara Santos, a widow from Chihuahua. Elias Kane became Samuel Santos, a horse trader with steady hands and a gift for silence. The local authorities, palms greased with American gold, asked no inconvenient questions. On the 4th day, news came that changed everything. A trader passing through brought word from the north. Judge Whitmore was dead, shot in his own courtroom by a homesteader he'd ruled against. Horace Tilton had been arrested for land fraud, his empire crumbling as former victims found courage to speak. "We could go back," Clara said, though her heart wasn't in the words. "Could," Elias agreed, "but that's not our life anymore." They traveled south instead, through countryside that grew greener as they left the desert behind. In a valley below the Sierra Madre, they found what they'd been looking for, without knowing it, a small ranch, abandoned but not ruined, with good water and grass for horses. The owner, fleeing debts and revolution, sold cheap to anyone with ready cash. Within a month, they had a home. Nothing fancy, adobe walls and a tile roof, 3 rooms and a kitchen, but solid and theirs. Clara learned to cook over a wood fire, to make tortillas and 10 chickens. Elias broke horses for the local haciendas, building a reputation as a man who could gentle the wildest animals. They hired local help Miguel for the heavy work, his wife Rosa to help with the house, and slowly became part of the valley's rhythm. At night, they'd sit on their small porch, watching stars wheel overhead while coyotes sang in the distance. Sometimes Elias would read aloud from the books they'd gradually collected. Sometimes Clara would sing the Spanish songs her mother had taught her. Often they'd just sit in comfortable silence, 2 scarred souls who'd found shelter in each other. "Do you miss it?" Clara asked one evening as autumn cooled the air. "The old life." "Which part?" "The running, the killing, the loneliness, the freedom." She said, "The wildness." Elias pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her temple where silver was already threading through the dark hair. "This is freedom, waking next to you, building something instead of tearing it down, choosing peace instead of having it forced on me. And if they come, if the past finds us, then we face it together. But Clara," he turned her to face him, hands gentle on her shoulders, "the past is done with us. We're different people now, Samuel and Clara Santos. Horse ranchers in a valley nobody's ever heard of. That other couple, The outlaw and the judge's daughter, they rode into Mexico and disappeared. Let them stay gone. Winter came mild that year, bringing rain that turned the valley green. Their first foal was born on Christmas morning, a black filly with her mother's spirit and her sire's strength. Clara helped with the delivery, hands steady and sure, no longer the soft woman who'd fled her father's house. Spring brought a letter, forwarded through careful channels. James had made it to California, was studying law, and wanted them to know that both Judge Whitmore's and Horace Tilton's estates had been seized for restitution to their victims. He'd claimed his own inheritance and invested it in railroads, figuring honest money could grow from dishonest roots if tended right. He signs it, your nephew, Clara said, tears blurring the careful script. Good boy, Elias said simply. He'll do well. 5 years passed. 10. The ranch prospered in its quiet way. Children came to fill the adobe rooms, first a son with his father's steady hands, then twin daughters with their mother's fierce spirit. The locals accepted them complete, these Americans who'd appeared from nowhere and made themselves part of the land. Sometimes Clara would catch Elias watching the horizon, hand unconsciously checking for the gun he no longer wore. Sometimes she'd wake from dreams of desert chase and gunfire, but these moments grew rarer as years softened the edges of memory. One day, a young couple appeared at their gate, the boy American, the girl Mexican, both wearing the desperate look of runners. Clara found them shelter, food, and work, without asking questions. Only later did Elias tell her what he'd learned. The boy had killed a man who'd forced himself on the girl, and they'd fled rather than trust justice to sort truth from power. We'll help them, Clara said simply. I know, Elias replied. Wouldn't have married you if you were the type to turn them away. They gave the couple new names, taught them the small wisdoms of disappearing, sent them further south with letters of introduction. It became a pattern over the years, desperate souls finding sanctuary at the Santos Ranch, leaving with new chances. We're becoming a station on some underground railroad for the lost, Clara observed one evening. There are worse things to be, Elias said. Besides, someone helped us once. Seems only right to pass it on. Their eldest son grew tall and quiet like his father, but with his mother's love of books. The twins were wild as colts, racing horses bareback through the valley while their parents pretended not to see. The ranch became known for its horses' strong, steady animals that would carry a rider through anything, but also for its hospitality, its refuge, its peculiar kind of justice. Years later, when silver touched both their heads and grandchildren played in the courtyard, Clara stood again at a window, watching her husband work with a young horse. His movements were slower now, but still sure. The scar on his face faded to a pale line that their granddaughter called Abuelo's smile. He must have felt her watching, because he looked up, touched his hat brim in the same gesture that had made her heart race 30 years ago. She smiled, hand resting on the windowsill their son had repaired just that morning. This was what happily ever after looked like. She thought, not a fairy tale ending, but a life built day by day, choice by choice. Two people who'd found each other in violence and darkness, choosing repeatedly to walk toward the light. That evening, as they always did, they sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains. Their youngest granddaughter climbed into Elias's lap, begging for a story. Tell about when you were an outlaw. Abuelo. I was never an outlaw. Mi amor. Just a man who took some wrong turns before finding the right road. And Abuela? Was she really a princess who ran away? Clara laughed, rich and full. No, sweetheart. Just a woman who decided to write her own story instead of living someone else's. Tell us anyway. The child insisted. So they did, weaving truth and tale together in the fading light. How a scarred man met a desperate woman in a canyon called Devil's Throat. How they chose each other against all sense and wisdom. How they learned that sometimes the most dangerous journey is the one that leads you home. When the story ended and the children were sent to bed, Clara and Elias remained on the porch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The stars emerged one by one, Same stars that had witnessed their flight across the desert, their crossing at the river, their choice to build rather than burn. No regrets, Elias asked, as he did sometimes when the past felt close. None, Clara answered, as she always did. You? He turned her face to his, kissed her with the same tenderness that had surprised her in their beginning. The kiss tasted of years and weathering, of children raised and horses gentled, of all the small victories that make a life. How could I regret the road that led me to you? In the distance, coyotes began their evening song, wild and free and eternal. Clara listened, remembering nights when that sound had been her only company. Now it was just music, background to a life fully lived. They went inside together, checking locks out of habit, banking the fire against morning's need. In their bed, handmade by their son from local pine, they came together with the easy familiarity of long marriage, still finding wonder in each other's touch. Later, as Elias slept beside her, Clara thought about the woman she'd been, Judge Whitmore's daughter. Trapped in lace and expectations, that woman would never have imagined this life, this love, this quiet triumph of days. But then, that woman had never stood at the edge of Devil's Throat and chosen to jump rather than surrender. Outside, an owl called, and its mate answered. The sound no longer spoke of loneliness, but of partnership, of two creatures making their way through darkness together. Clara smiled, pressed closer to her husband's warmth, and let sleep take her toward another dawn in their valley, another day in their carefully built forever. The past was done with them, as Elias had said, but its gifts remained. The strength found in struggle, the love forged in fire, the knowledge that sometimes the best justice is the kind you make yourself, one choice at a time, until you've built something worth defending. In the morning there would be horses to tend and children to feed, visitors to welcome and stories to share. But for now there was just this, two hearts beating in rhythm, two souls at rest, two people who'd found in each other not an ending but a beginning that renewed itself with each passing day. And somewhere in the desert, the wind still sang through the stones of Devil's Throat. But Clara and Elias were no longer there to hear it. They'd found their own music, their own story, their own way home. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West Campfire. If you enjoyed Clara and Elias's journey, we'd love to hear where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like our characters connected across the desert. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, redemption, and adventure in the American frontier. What did you think of Clara's choice? Would you have had the courage to ride into the unknown? Share your thoughts. Every comment helps keep these campfire tales burning bright.